points that people make. I think we had a variety of contributions. And for my own part, I've been asked to focus some of the issues from a senior management perspective. And as you become more senior, then you become less concerned with the internal issues. And you become much more concerned with the context in which the company is operating, and particularly the changing expectations and aspirations and requirements of stakeholders. And in that external world, things are rapidly changing. And in the title, we've got post-COVID-19, but of course we're right in the middle of the pandemic. And yesterday we had the biggest daily increases ever. In terms of my role today, multiple roles. Most of what I do concerns directors and boards, but one of my roles is president of the Institute of Management Services, which, like the organising body of this event, is a professional institution. We regard ourselves as the home of productivity professionals, which we use as a strapline, and we're concerned very much with methodologies and techniques for improving productivity and quality. We were formed in 1941, in the middle of the Second World War, when the people working in the factories were mainly women who didn't have any experience of sort of working at all, many of them, let alone in a factory. And obviously productivity and output was very important to the war effort. And we now have an international membership, and a key qualification is a 4-week course leaded to a certificate. It's very concentrated and can be done in weekly modules. And as with any professional body, there are various degrees of associate, member, fellow, degrees of membership. And also we have, as other professional bodies, our professional journal and newsletter and various activities. And I've given the website if anyone wants more information. In terms of the world that we're living in, many people have been delighted, actually, to find that, they're discovering they can hear birds song, they can go outside and can actually breathe, or they've noticed that the sky is blue. For other species in the environment, lockdown has actually been outstanding. and I'm sure that, the people, the species that we share the planet with would obviously like more of it. But the challenges that we faced, and the challenges that the directors and boards that I meet and deal with, that we're very much concerned with, those challenges remain, namely global warming, climate change. They're existential threats to our life on this planet. The degradation of the environment, the alarming loss of biodiversity, growing mountains of rubbish, and the particular difficulty that we have in dealing with rubbish from manufacturing and process activities. And the satellites that we heard about earlier end up as space junk. If they hit each other, that fragments and creates a chain reaction. And there's a huge problem building up. And in so many of the things that we do, we are creating huge problems for future generations. We're running down scarce natural capital and rare minerals at an alarming rate. We are aware, or we ought to have been aware, of the risk and vulnerability of many of the just-in-time practices that manufacturing operations rely upon, and the dangers of actually relying upon global supply chains that are very vulnerable to interruption. And there's an overriding requirement that many business leaders recognize, that it's impossible for us to survive on our planet if everyone on the planet wants to live the lifestyle of, say, people in North America and drive around in cars or fly around in airplanes so that they can sit up on a beach in Spain somewhere else, rather than getting drunk and sitting up at home. We need to basically adapt and transition to simpler, healthier, and much more sustainable practices and lifestyles. And that is the overriding challenge and that the chief executives that I meet, it's the thing that's keeping them awake at night. And the pandemic has actually given us a once-in-a-century opportunity to change. Because in terms of recovery strategies from lockdown, there's a stark choice. We could return to previous approaches, strategies, and priorities, and we can protect and seek to milk past investments and reboot or ramp up the previous business and operating models that we had. But that world was leading towards a cliff edge when we trigger irreversible global warming and climate change. So it is neither desirable nor feasible and sustainable in the longer run. The alternative, and this is arguably the biggest business opportunity that we've ever had, it's incredibly exciting because we actually have an opportunity to adopt and scale up more sustainable approaches, strategies, and priorities. And the key to this is innovation and transformation, and particularly transition to new business and operating models. And this is very exciting. And going back to the engagement that Remy was talking about, what we were doing prior to COVID-19 certainly wasn't engaging younger generations, because they all look at me and they say, Dad, you're destroying our heritage. We won't have anything like the life that you've taken for granted at the rate at which you are destroying the environment and running through scarce natural capital. So we have a great opportunity to engage a whole range of stakeholders in rethinking what we're about and what our priorities ought to be as we recover from the pandemic. And in terms of responsible and sustainable manufacturing, it's quite clear what we need to do. And that is reduce and avoid negative environmental impact, conserve energy and natural resources. People get excited. I actually had an award last year for renewable energy. And yet, it's exciting what's happening to renewables in terms of the falling costs and increased proportion. But if overall energy consumption is going up because of economic growth and the way that we operate and the way we manufacture and process its sector operates, then the more we're still using fossil fuels. So we need to reduce and conserve at all stages of the value chain, from design to recycling and reuse. And it's interesting yesterday that almost all the process maps that we saw were of just a manufacturing process within a single company. And people trying to improve the productivity in the factory. In fact, the more they're doing that, and the more that factory is generating things that damage the environment, you actually wish people would stop. And that manufacturing is less efficient, actually producing less. We need to think more broadly of the whole value chain and the whole life cycle of the product. And most of what manufacturing produces, the end of the life cycle is a huge problem that public bodies have around the world in terms of dealing with that waste. Future generations might be out in the pouring rain, rummaging around a rubbish dump, trying to find something that they can recycle. If we don't dramatically change our view of and think in terms of the whole life cycle. We need a zero carbon footprint across this whole life cycle and across the circular economy. And again, we need to increasingly think, and senior management and directors need to do this, because everyone else is literally focused on running the business. We need to link in and not think of our manufacturing units as self-contained corporate operations, but try and make them part of a circular economy so that our outputs become inputs to a complementary activity, that something that previously was waste actually can become a useful input. And along with that, we need a much more responsible and sustainable cultures, regulations, and ecosystems. And there's a whole world of things that we need to change there. and it relies upon collaboration, working with other entities. And of course, coming back to the tools and techniques that the Institute of Management Services are concerned with, then we certainly need to use appropriate and sustainable approaches, models, processes, tools, and suppliers. And there's a whole world there that we haven't really got into over these 2 days of alternatives to the ones that we're using at the moment. So in terms of issues for senior management in manufacturing, and we heard a lot yesterday about digital and other new technologies, and we heard that whether or not they help us or harm us depend upon what we use them for and how we use them and the purpose of their use. And the reality is that a lot of the tools and techniques of productivity started with the productivity of people. Where in today's world, we're increasingly looking at the combination of people and technology. And of course, the issues are how we use the best of what people can do and their particular attributes, capabilities, and advantages, so that they're complementary to the distinctive capabilities and contributions that particular technologies can make. And one of the consequences of COVID-19 is that the relative cost of people compared with the alternatives and robots has actually gone up. Social distancing, creating a work environment that people don't catch the virus, the cost of personal protection equipment and all the rest of it. People are actually quite a problem, in many environments. And again, we need to reduce the vulnerability of extended supply chains, the scramble that people have had around the world to actually get hold of personal protective equipment. It's absolutely amazing to actually look at what's going on. And whether it's reshoring or doing things differently, we don't ever want to be in the situation we've been in again. And we need to speed up the adoption of various disruptive technologies. And these basically are an answer to many of the problems. There's a lot of manufacturing. Manufacturing strategies of major companies have been based on creating products that have a limited life. And at the end of it, you don't want them to be reused because you've always wanted someone to buy the latest version, junk their old car and sort of get the new flashy one, keep up with the Joneses and the neighbors, don't be seen with last year's car. And whereas, of course, things like 3D printing means that increasingly you can design manufacturing products so that people can print out locally without the rest of it, the component that's beginning to wear out, and actually repair it or reuse. There's a whole world of possibilities. We could radically transform many manufacturing operations by sort of rethinking the whole process. And again, for senior managers, increasingly need to switch their emphasis to increasing and championing reuse, repairing, and recycling. Increasingly, we need to repurpose and refocus our organizations, particularly instead of thinking of what we do as producing products, to focus on the rationale for the purchase. Why are people buying things that create problems in terms of disposal, that are burning up vital natural capital and rare minerals? What are they wanting to get from those things? And can we provide, services and solutions, different ways of giving them what they require? And maybe, if we actually engaged, as we should engage, with customers and users, we may come up with something very different that doesn't create this huge problem of what you do with things, when they're at the end of their life. And again, if those externalities were taken into account in senior management and board decision making, we would have a very different world. Because at the moment, companies on many things because someone else picks up the cost of what to do with all the junk that what they produce ends up as. And again, in a lot of the things I'm talking about, senior management and boards in particular, and the ones that I meet are already doing this. They're shifting the emphasis from competition, not beating some other supplier of things, but how they can collaborate with public bodies, collaborate with regulators, and collaborate with customers, suppliers, and build new partnerships to actually create alternative solutions across the whole supply chain and the lifestyle of what we and the life cycle of what we produce. And there's a huge world of opportunities there in terms of collaborative activities. And for people that really think about this, instead of being trapped into a dead end, the people out there in the wider world are increasingly protesting against and objecting to. We actually have an opportunity to change and do things differently and become part of the solution rather than the cause of the problem. So in terms of issues, what the pandemic has certainly taught us, it's taught me, is that most organizations and the people that run them, as long as I can remember, have given speeches and written books about agility, flexibility, and all the rest of it. A few weeks into the pandemic, and companies are queuing up to get government assistance, to actually stay alive. And the one thing they haven't been, many of them, is agile, flexible, or resilient. And they're discovering that they also haven't been responsible or sustainable in terms of what they were doing before. And the big challenge is actually how we can produce greener output with less natural capital and reduce fossil fuel and net carbon requirements. How we can adopt practices and measures that actually address UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sure many of them, I don't think they've actually been mentioned so far in the 2 days. And also in terms of how we measure performance, the objectives we set and how we monitor and measure them need to relate not to the world we were in prior to COVID-19, but to the revised purpose and new priorities that we urgently need to establish for our companies. And one of the key things that I want to very briefly say something about now is a world of personalized 24/7 performance decision support tools, because it is possible at a relatively low cost to put in ways of enabling the changes that need to be made to occur. And I spent quite a few years in this world and actually chaired a group that has actually produced these for a number of major companies around the world. And we have actually won national and international awards for innovation. So in terms of transforming performance, you can either do things that apply to the whole company, and they're expensive and time-consuming, disruptive. And we used to do these, and before COVID-19, we're into restructuring, reorganizing, and doing a whole range of things, because they're a great business for consulting firms, and people felt they had to do them. But because they were time-consuming, and they took a number of years, in a rapidly changing world, when you're part of the way through it, you actually realize you no longer need it, because we don't actually want to go there anymore, because the world is changing. But instead, there's other things that we can do that are relatively quick, focused, and give huge returns on investment. And one of these is change the performance support that you actually provide the key work groups. In other words, you don't need to change everything, but what you need to do is actually identify the key work groups that actually make the biggest difference to what you're doing and your profitability and your performance. And they're relatively few number. And I've led over 20 research projects now to identify, for example, critical success factors for things that, whether it's winning business, building customer relationships, pricing, creating and exploiting know-how. And what you find is that there's a small number of superstars who do things much better than other people. and very often, normally they do things much better than the firm's official way of doing it. What's in the manual, what's in the process, for most companies is not the best way of doing it. You're trying to improve something and work on something that actually is already not terribly good. And the whole purpose of performance support is, and the cost of many solutions for a global company is hardly more than the cost of employing another middle manager. But you can help everyone to do it the way a superstar does. And if it's something new, then again you can use the tools, 24/7, to enable people to actually work out the best way of doing it. And some of the adopters have actually told me that that midway through the afternoon, they've been able to roll out globally a solution to a problem that when they were having breakfast, they didn't know they had. So the right performance support tools are an ideal basis for actually moving to a different and better business model. And one of the key elements of this is actually understanding what these critical success factors are. And most of the critical success factors are themselves related to understanding. So, for example, if you're bidding for business, if you're competing to get the contract, to supply the things that you then need to manufacture, you need to understand the criteria that are going to be used to select the winner. You need to understand what they're looking for. You need to understand your differentiators. And this is an example, something for one manufacturing company. And this has particularly helped people to understand what was special and distinctive about their own technology, which was that these components actually had the ability to flex and change, when they're actually operating, within an engine. And it's quite interesting, very often with technology, and people are hopeless, in terms of using technology. I had AI environments when I was at Xerox PARC in the 1980s. It's absurd that people are now discovering and actually talking about things that we took for granted. Human beings are incredibly slow, because very often nobody actually understands it. One or two people in the technical department understand the technology, nobody else does. And yet, with the right performance support tool, everyone in the organization, everyone in the supply chain, anyone who's a customer or user should be able to understand, what it can do, what its capabilities are, and how it can best be used. So the benefits, and as I said, we don't have time to go into great detail on this. I'd love to have had a slot, to actually talk about performance support. But it does boost performance in a responsible way, because you can actually give the tools to customers so they can see the consequences of their decisions. And 9 times out of 10, people will go for the option that is less damaging for the environment. You can massively speed up responses. The world, when it took you 2 years to roll in innovation around the globe for a multinational company, now you can now do it, in minutes or hours. You increase understanding for the people, the things that Remy was talking about. If someone is doing if someone's doing a difficult job, then whatever you say, try and make them feel better. It is a difficult, demanding job. And if you can help them with the performance support tool to make it easier for them to do something that's difficult, you're reducing anxiety and stress. You can cut compliance costs, because you can literally configure these things that someone cannot produce an output that creates a quality problem that involves 2 components that don't work together, that doesn't have the clause by law that you need to have in there. You literally take that out completely. You don't have financial institutions paying billions in compensation for mis-selling, because you literally can prevent it happening so easily and quickly. You can avoid risks and enable bespoke responses. And the whole focus of the thing is making it easy for people to do something difficult, making it easy for them to do the right thing, and very difficult for them to do something that's damaging or undesirable. You can free people from dependency on a particular location. The support can be there 24/7 wherever they are, including on the move. And they're ideal for supporting mobile activities, and they're ideal for supporting transition to new business models. And you do get huge paybacks and large return on investment. I remember one we did for Cisco Systems. They employed a PhD statistician, and in the first batch of users, literally the first batch, and it was ultimately used by sort of thousands of people around the world, including customers, that first batch, gave them 1,000 times return on investment. So in all the things that I'm talking about, the transformation that we need to make to a very different and more sustainable model of manufacturing, and engaging with customers and thinking about the whole supply chain and the whole life cycle of what we produce. To me, that's incredibly exciting. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and it does actually give huge investments. And in terms of what Remy is saying, it gives us a marvelous opportunity to re-engage with the younger generation that we are in danger of losing. And all of this, it is not, I'm not holding on to this or keeping it secret, because it's all in various research reports that we've produced. There's 3 book-length reports that look at it from a knowledge management perspective, a talent management perspective, and a change management perspective. And there are the individual critical success factors reports, looking at the critical success factors in particular ways. But it isn't expensive, and it's quick. If you understand how to do something differently, and you don't need 6 months training or something like that. On Monday morning, you just do it the winning way. It's a mindset, really. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. And it's actually seeing things that hitherto we've lived in a world of problems. But actually, we're living in a world of exciting opportunities. And human beings, once you put the right support environment in place, 9 times out of 10, they rise to the opportunity.